You know, the economy can feel impossibly complex, right? All these moving parts, all this jargon. But what if, underneath it all, it actually works like a simple machine? In this explainer, we're going to break down a template that shows you the hidden forces behind, well, pretty much everything, from a market boom to a global financial crisis. Let's dive in.
So this is the big idea here, and it comes from a model by the investor Ray Dalio. He basically argues that behind the millions of transactions and crazy headlines, the economy is driven by a handful of simple, repeating patterns. And if you can see those patterns, you can understand the machine.
So here's how we're going to do it. First, we'll start with the smallest possible building block. Then, we'll layer on the big forces that create these massive cycles. After that, we'll look at what happens when things go really wrong. And finally, we'll boil it all down into 3 simple rules to help you make sense of it all.
All right, Section 1. Look, if you want to understand the entire economic machine, you've got to start with its single, tiniest part, the transaction.
You and I do this 1,000 times a day without even thinking about it. You know, buying a coffee, paying your rent, investing in a stock. It's all the exact same thing, a simple exchange. A buyer and a seller using either money or credit. Think of it like a single atom. It's the one thing that builds everything else in the economy.
It really is that simple. If you just add up all the money and all the credit spent on everything in every market, you get total spending. And that one number, that's the fuel for the entire economic engine. That's really it.
So if spending is the fuel, what's the biggest part of that fuel? You might think it's money, but it's not. It's credit. Just to give you an idea, in an economy like the US, there's something like $50 trillion in credit, but only about $3 trillion in actual money. That huge difference makes credit the biggest, the most volatile, and honestly, the most important piece of this whole puzzle.
So, what even is credit? Well, it's just a promise to pay later. That's all. It lets you borrow from your future self so you can spend more today. And the second that credit is created, something else is created too: debt. It's an asset for the person who lent the money, but it's a liability for the person who borrowed it.
And this right here is why credit is such a game changer. Think about it. In a world without credit, the only way for us to grow is to actually produce more stuff. It's a slow, steady climb. But with credit, oh, you can supercharge growth. You can spend way more than you produce. The catch, of course, is that eventually you have to spend less than you produce to pay it all back. And that swing, that push and pull, that's what creates cycles.
Let's make this super simple. Let's say you earn $100,000 a year and you don't have any debt.
Okay, so because you have that good income, you're considered credit-worthy. A bank is more than happy to give you, say, a $10,000 credit card.
And just like that, even though you only earned $100,000, you can now go out and spend $110,000. You've literally just pulled spending from your future into the present.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Your $110,000 of spending is someone else's income. And since their income just went up, they are now more creditworthy. So they can go borrow and spend more, and then their spending becomes another person's income, and you can see how this creates a self-reinforcing loop that really drives those economic booms.
Okay, on to Section 2. Now that we've seen how that little loop works, let's zoom out and see how it builds up into 3 massive forces that shape our entire economic reality.
When you layer everything together, this is what you get. The foundation, that slow, steady line going up, is productivity growth. But layered on top of that, you have 2 big debt cycles. There's the short-term one, that kind of 5 to 8 year wave of booms and recessions, and then there's this massive long-term debt cycle that plays out over like 75 to 100 years. We're all pretty familiar with this short-term cycle, right? You've seen it play out. First, you get an expansion. Credit is cheap, everybody's spending, and that pushes prices up, inflation. So to cool things off, the central bank steps in and raises interest rates. That makes borrowing more expensive, spending slows down, and boom, you get a recession. And then once inflation is back under control, the bank lowers rates again, and the whole 5 to 8 year cycle starts all over.
But here's the really crucial part. With each and every one of those cycles, as a whole, we tend to leave a little bit more debt behind than we had before. I mean, it's just human nature, right? We'd all rather borrow and spend a little more than tighten our belts and pay everything back. And so over decades, this behavior causes a slow, massive buildup of debt across the whole system.
This brings us to this really important idea called the debt burden. All that means is the ratio of your total debt to your total income. And for a long time, this is totally manageable because incomes are rising too. But eventually, after decades and decades, those debt payments start to grow faster than our incomes. And that is the moment the long-term cycle finally hits its breaking point and reverses.
Which brings us to part 3, the great deleveraging. We're talking about moments like 1929 or 2008. This is what happens at the peak of that long-term cycle. And this isn't your garden variety recession. No, this is a painful but totally necessary reset of the entire system.
Now this is what makes a deleveraging so dangerous. In a normal recession, the central bank has a go-to move. They just lower interest rates to encourage people to start borrowing again. But what happens when you get to the peak of the long-term cycle? Well, interest rates are already at or near zero. The central bank's main tool is basically useless. They're out of ammo.
So how on earth do you fix a problem that big? It turns out there are only 4 levers you can really pull to get that debt burden down. And believe me, they are all politically painful. You can cut spending, which is austerity. You can force debts to be reduced through defaults. You can redistribute wealth with higher taxes, or you can just print money. There are no easy choices on that list.
This leads to this idea of a beautiful deleveraging. Now I know, beautiful sounds like a really weird word to use for what is basically a massive crisis. But all it means is navigating the situation skillfully. It's this incredible balancing act, mixing some of the painful stuff, like spending cuts, with some of the inflationary stuff, like printing money, to fix the economy without letting society completely tear itself apart. Okay, last part. We've seen how the machine works, the cycles that creates, and what happens when it breaks. So the big question is, how do we navigate all of this? Well, the whole model really boils down to 3 simple but incredibly powerful rules.
Okay, rule number 1. Don't let your debt rise faster than your income, because you just can't outrun a growing debt burden forever. Rule number 2, don't let your income rise faster than your productivity. In the long run, it just makes you uncompetitive. And rule number 3, and this is maybe the most important one of all, do everything you can to raise your productivity. Because at the end of the day, that is the only thing that drives real, lasting improvements in our standard of living.
So the real power of this model isn't just understanding the past. It's about giving you a template, a new lens to see what's happening in the present. You can start to see the gears turning behind the headlines. So I'll just leave you with this question. Looking at the world around you right now, what parts of this machine, what cycles do you see playing out?